Hello, beautiful. I hope you're having the best day ever. Today, I'm sharing with you guys a few simple spring DIYs that are absolutely beautiful, and I hope that you guys love them, and I hope that you guys recreate some of these DIYs. And if you do, tag me at Beautiful Living Home on Instagram because I would love to see what you've done. Let's get started. For the first DIY today, we will be making beautiful botanical coasters using air-dried clay. The first thing you want to do is pull off a pretty good sized chunk of clay and sort of warm it up in your hands, then roll it out flat on a clean, dry surface. I'm using freezer paper here. And once I've got it to a bit over 1/4 of an inch thickness, I'm going to use the dried floral of my choice. Here I'm using dried baby's breath. I'm going to sit it on top of the round piece of clay, and I'm going to roll the rolling pin over it so that the baby's breath gets imprinted into the clay. And you want to do this in one smooth roll so that you get a crisp, clear imprint. Once you've done that, you want to take your cutter, and here I'm using a 2.5 inch biscuit cutter, and just press firmly down into your clay and remove your excess clay. Pull off your cutter, and there you have a beautiful botanical coaster. When you're using air-dried clay, you're going to want to let that dry for at least 24 hours, and you will know that it's dry when it's no longer cool to the touch, and it will be pretty close to a pure white. I actually dried my coasters in the oven. I rolled out my final coasters on parchment paper. That way I wouldn't have to lift them after I had them rolled out. And I just slipped that parchment paper onto a baking sheet and popped them into the oven on its lowest setting, which I believe was 175 degrees Fahrenheit, and just left them in overnight. And they were perfectly dry the next morning. The next step is to clean up the edges. I just took a piece of sandpaper and lightly sanded around the edges to get a perfectly smooth finish. The next thing you're going to do is repeat this with all of the coasters. And the great thing about DIYing this is that you can make as many or as few as you would like. Then, as you can see, I am cleaning off all of the dust and using a paintbrush to make sure that there is no dust left in the imprint, because we are going to paint these. Air dry clay is not safe with water. It will sort of melt, for lack of a better word. So we definitely have to finish these, and I'm going to be painting these with a white paint. I'm using this paint that I picked up from Hobby Lobby that says that it is a paint and sealer in one. I've never used this before, so I'm not exactly sure what the outcome will be or how durable it will be, but I thought I would give it a shot this time. And I painted each of the coasters on the front and on the back and on the sides. That's very important because remember, we have to protect this and seal it from water. I did 3 coats of this paint on everything, and I left it at that, but I actually may go back in and put a clear sealer coat just to make sure that these don't get damaged by water. And to clean these, I would just use a lightly damp cloth. I would definitely not submerge these, just to be careful. I will show you guys how these turned out at the end of the video. Our next DIY is so beautiful, and I know that you guys are gonna love this, and this will be the perfect thing for spring and for Easter. These beautiful naturally dyed eggs that we will actually embellish with floral prints, and they are so beautiful. I can't wait for you guys to see how to do this. I cut up 4 beets and added them to a pot with 8 cups of water. We're gonna let this simmer gently on the stove for about 30 minutes. And while we're letting that simmer, we're gonna get started on our eggs. I just grabbed a big 3 dozen flat of eggs just to make sure that I had enough. And here I'm using some tulle that I had on hand. It's a very fine tulle. The next thing I'm doing is getting a few small pieces of greenery that I can use on my eggs to create the floral design. And as you can see here, I'm using a few pieces of these ferns at the tips to create the fern design. Then I grabbed a couple of leaves off of this eucalyptus, which actually turned out not to be such a great idea, but I will show you guys how that turned out when we see the final results. In this next step, we are going to be using that tool that I showed you guys earlier. And I cut it into strips that are about 5 to 6 inches wide and at least like 10 inches long. For this first egg, I'm using a piece of flat leaf Italian parsley, and I'm going to lay it over the egg, and then I'm going to use the tool and place that over the egg and the parsley, and I'm going to pull it all tightly around the egg. Not super tight, but you do want it to be pretty firm. And I'm just pulling it over the egg, and then I'm twisting it around in order to make it tight and firm. And then once I have twisted it, I'm going to take that end and I'm going to tie it into a knot and just pull and make sure that your knot is secure. Theoretically, everything that is not covered by your greenery is going to be dyed, so you definitely want to make sure that the greenery has really good contact with the egg and that it is on there. And as you can see here, I'm just trimming off all that excess fabric. And we'll do one of the eucalyptus leaves here, as well as a fern, so you guys can kind of see the process again. This is such a lovely process that yields such a beautiful result, and I'm going to link the website that I originally found this process on. I did make a few changes, but I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. At this point, we're going to set our eggs aside and we're going to strain the beet juice through a fine mesh sieve and just reserve the beets. And you're going to be left with this beautiful all-natural dye. Transfer your dye into a smaller pot, small enough that it's gonna raise the level of the dye, but large enough that you'll be able to fit your eggs into it. Stir in 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And by the way, these eggs are raw, they are not pre-boiled, they will be cooking in the dye. Make sure that all of your eggs are fully covered. Let the eggs simmer for 30 minutes, and then you're going to remove them from the pot and let them drain onto paper towels. And just be careful because this beet juice will stain. And we're going to let our eggs cool off on the paper towels. Once they're cool, we're going to cut off the knots and take the eggs out of the tool, and we will have something like this. The leaf or greenery that you put on the egg should peel off fairly easily, but I did find that the eggs where I twisted the tool on as tightly as I possibly could, the greenery was actually a little bit harder to peel off. So that's why I said earlier, you want to make sure it's on there and pretty firmly, but you don't want to squeeze the life out of the egg. If there were any extra bits that were hard to get off, I just ran the egg gently under cool water until it was a little bit easier to get them off. I did do a couple of other colors using purple cabbage and turmeric, and I will show you how those all turned out at the end of the video. This next DIY is inspired by the sense of spring. With the changing seasons, it's always nice to change the scent in your home. So I decided to make a lavender scented candle. I ended up using soy wax from Joann because I wasn't able to get the wax from Amazon because we did have some winter weather here where I live, but I will link it down in the description box. I used wicks that already had the tabs attached just to make things a little bit easier. And to hold my wick in place, I just used a little wooden candy stick that I already had on hand. You could use a chopstick or a pencil. Technically, a container with the width of this one really would call for 2 wicks, but I just wanted to keep this very simple, so I just used 1 wick. I added about 40 to 50 drops of lavender essential oil after I turned the heat off the wax. Leave your candle to cool for at least 24 hours without moving it. If your candle happens to turn out the way mine did, with a big dip in the center, do not fear. That has something to do with the temperature of your container and the temperature of the wax. You can just melt some more wax and pour it on top of that, and then you will have a beautiful smooth candle like this. So now let's take a closer look at how all of our projects turned out. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And most importantly, don't forget to come back next time. Until then.